Hello, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be designing on Photoshop. Today's lesson, how I come up with my compositions. Let's go. How I create my compositions. It is a question I get regularly, and honestly, I don't have a nailed on answer to give you. My compositions are always random, and is mainly based off the images I find. I look at it like a puzzle. The first step is finding the edges, which in a design sense are the images. Once I have the images picked out and ready to go, I am then able to start thinking about typefaces, colours, details, along with everything else. Today I'll be talking through 3 designs that are totally different in composition, breaking them down for you to understand my reasoning and ideation process behind choosing the direction I wanted to go. The 3 designs will be these. Firstly, a design with a main image that takes up most of the canvas. We will talk about how to fit everything around it easily. Second is a 2-image design. How you can use 2 different types of poses in whatever circumstance and still make the composition clean with room to build a design around them. And finally, a design with a lot of images being used. These ones are the hardest to figure out in terms of composition, but once you have that planned out, everything runs smoothly. So, let's get into the first design. Here is the first design. The main subject is Fernando Tatis Jr. of the San Diego Padres. We will talk about how I use the background and foreground to round up the overall layout of this design. As you can see, the main subject takes up a lot of the canvas. The yellow background is where we will put in most of the work, adding those textures and bits of information type to give the audience a sense of who the player is if they didn't know already. We can also use his white jersey to add in additional foreground depth, so it's not all heavy set in the back, but keep it more balanced. This is where we start to build out the design from the beginning. Starting to build around a main subject like this can be sometimes difficult to figure out where things can end up. For me, starting off with some textures and directional shapes can always help guide me further down the line. As you can see, we have shapes and textures going from left to right and top to bottom. This gives me the opportunity to use these directions for information type, as the shapes will help guide the audience's eye from one detail to the other. Also, make sure to balance out the colours when designing. I like to have one main colour, yellow in this case, and 2 more. Those other 2 will always look a lot better when balanced, which gives a better overall composition. We then move on to the small type. As you can see, the yellow gradients going from left to right helps guide the audience's eye across the information type I have provided above it. It follows suit nicely and gives the design, which is quite distorted overall, a small sense of structure in terms of grid and layout. As I said, not all type has to be 500 pixels in size. Sometimes it's better to make the audience work and make them zoom in to fully see the detail you provided in the design. It's all preference. It's up to you. As we then start to build out the background and foreground a little bit more, we start coming to the end of the design. This is where you can find small opportunities to add in some more detail if you wish to. Sometimes it's better to leave it as it is, but never be afraid to take a bit more time to try something out, as I did for the next step. Adding a smaller image of Tatis Jr. in the top left gives the design a bit more than just one image. It gives the audience a small break off the main subject. Splitting the design somewhat with the addition of the brown box next to it, which holds more information. Again, the gradient shapes on the left hand side helps guide the user from top to bottom to see that new image and longitude type we added. Adding small bits of structure to make sure it's nicely laid out. And then we add in the final textures, color correct it, and we are done. This design is very much all over the place, but also is easy to look at thanks to the guides we added. If you're making a design with this type of idea, it's best to create a version where the information is easy to view, giving it space to breathe in amongst the chaos, whether that's putting it inside a shape or letting it roam free in some white space. This design took me a while to create because of the composition and just trying different ideas along the way. It's better to go into these types of designs open-minded, letting your mind go free to whatever idea you may have next to improve it. Let's move on to the next design. Design number 2. This design is a lot more structured and is using the grid of 3. It is a lot more spatially aware and open than the last, with a lot of breathing room for the other details to sit around the image. This design was based on my use of typography, so I knew that I needed to have room to fit everything I wanted to have in it. Having it structured in layout meant that I was able to find these open spaces very easily. Having one image at the top left and one at the bottom right allowed me to utilise the space in the other 2 corners for whatever I wanted. One by one, I started to pick away on the white space to add in the typography I was talking about. Starting with the main attraction, Darius Garland's stats so far in that season. Once this has been added, I knew that all of the main details needed would have been secured and settled into the design, which then helps me move on to plan everything else around it. Continuing to add and build out the overall structure of the design, these little type elements I added advances the use of grids. Makes it easy for the layout to seem more natural by using different alignments on the type with the positions they are in. From then on, it's easy sailing. I then need to add in the final details to round off this design to make it look a bit more enthusiastic than just a plain white background. So little details like a grey to white gradient gives a slight new look whilst keeping the look and feel clean. Adding wood for a basketball reference gives it an extra touch and detail. It really is easy to make compositions like this as they are so simple and clean. Once you build the fundamentals, the hard part is done. You then need to finalise the finishing touches in your set. With this type of clean composition, don't overthink it too much because then you might end up making it busier than it needs to be. As you can see, a clean composition can still look kinda cool. Design number 3. This one is the K-pop group G-Idol. Known for their tomboy style of music and fashion, I wanted to try and portray that with the look of the design. The first thing I do with a design like this is try and find a place for each of the images on the canvas. This may take a lot of playing around with at first to see which image fits where best. This is a very fun part of the design process with an image mask like this. And of course, if you have to add effects on it, each image will take different types of effects depending on gradient map, selective color, curves, levels. They're not always going to be the same, even though they are from the same photo shoot, so just keep that in mind. Then the next step as always is to build around the imagery itself, and there is a lot for this one. As they are the main attraction, because they are who this design is about, the rest will be the little detail work. Adding their logos to implementing shapes that fit the grungy effect we are trying to convey. Then all we have to do to finish up is the typography of the group and members' names. We put one in the top left and bottom right, which gives a sense of symmetry in a way, but that is where we built the space up to place the type in at the end. Then adding all the final little bits and bobs you think are needed and most importantly, necessary, then you're done. Here is the final look we have. So overall, there is a common theme with how I create my compositions. The imagery is always the first stepping stone to getting it ready for all the other details around it. Nothing is very complicated in design unless you start to overthink quite a lot about what you want to make or where you should place certain things. I am also a victim of this mindset quite often, but just let your imagination run wild and create whatever you feel like. Nobody sees you test different looks, they just see the final design, so experiment as much as you like until you feel it's ready to post. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.